Right. Well, thank you very much for coming along. And I wish this was, particularly for this talk, that this was actually a real talk where I was giving a PowerPoint presentation in front of an audience, because bearing in mind so many people have memories, as I know from what people have posted online, and experiences of the Imperial Hotel and strong views, many which have been aired on both the Civic Society Facebook page, the Stroud Camera Facebook page, and on the Stroud Our History page, which, as it has 38,000 members, you would actually expect, sorry, I think 3,800 members, you'd expect actually to have quite a lively audience. Many of you may have noticed that the current sorry state of the Imperial Hotel, and perhaps the surprise that just realized that it suddenly did it was suddenly boarded up a year ago. Right. Okay, so it wasn't moving on the way I expected. Now, because I've not put my picture up on the side, because I don't like having a little sort of image of me, and you wouldn't see me anyway, because the room I'm in is in darkness. And even when I've turned the lights on, it turns out people can't see me. So this is a photograph of me from 2014. It's reasonably accurate to now, standing in front of Royal York Crescent in Bristol, looking as I'm about to burst into song. And it is, in fact, a spectacular building. On a Civic Society tour that we did in 2014, photographed by our official photographer, Bill Hicks. So it's a rather nice picture on the hop. So that at least gives you an idea. If you don't know what I look like, that's what I look like on a summer's day. This is the Imperial Hotel now. It's boarded up. The hoardings at the front, which suggested that some work was being done, appear to be more to do with the railway. The railway appears to be laying down some cables or pipes. Anyway, so that's its current sorry state. And the best thing that can be said is that when the metal screens went up in 2020, you notice that they painted them a tasteful color to blend in with the hotel to make it less conspicuous, but it was a surprise to everyone. Now, this is the best photograph we've managed to find of the hotel in its heyday. It's slightly difficult to date. All the cars are pre-war, or most of them seem to be pre-war. On the other hand, in the early post-war years, there were very few new cars on the road. So it's quite possible that this is a photograph from the late 1940s. But you can see what a handsome building it was at the time, and also what very good condition it was in. There's the cursive script of Imperial Hotel that you can see on the front. There's this unusual arrangement of chimneys, which is a Bucknall signature. So the chimney is not all in a row on the ridge of the roof. This chimney has been placed facing onto the facade, and the unusual tops to the chimneys. But we'll discuss the actual architectural details sometime later. But this is the scene as you arrive in Stroud today and come across the footbridge, and you're confronted by this desolate site across the car park of the boarded up hotel. I'm glad to say, by the way, the children did make the train, and I was surprised at the number of children who get on the train to go to Kemble, Swindon, and wherever. The platform was absolutely packed. They all made it to the train. I had not expected to see quite so many children get to the train. This is a close-up of the boarding up, metal screens, and with security notices on them. This is looking the other way. One thing to note is the fact that the word hotel is missing now, and we're now reduced to the word Imperial. Whether it fell off or was removed or what, but there should be a cursive script saying hotel there. Now, the last person to run the hotel, and he had a 10-year lease, was Lakshman Galage, or it could be Gallage or Galage, I'm not sure. Probably Galage sounds better, who ran it both as a hotel and the Royal Orchid Thai restaurant from 2010 to 2020, which had very high reviews, very good reviews, and many people may have gone to. And the hotel was also well reviewed on TripAdvisor and elsewhere, and he responded to comments very thoroughly. This is from before Lakshman's time. And this is one of my favorite pictures because it shows just what a splendid growth of Virginia creeper the hotel could display. So it looks thoroughly unruly and bearded. And one thing that shows that it's prior to Lakshman's era is this inn sign, the purple inn sign with a crown in the middle of it. Whereas, and that's another view of it when in winter, when the Virginia creeper has died down. And the other signs that we're prior to that era, not only the inn sign, I think it's a crown that's in there. I'm not sure what the devices are around the inn sign. I was trying to find a photograph of it as a Berni Inn and thought this might be it, but this actually just says Country Grill. But one remnant of the Berni Hill era, the Berni Inn era rather, sounds like rather than the Berni Hill era, is that it says Scotch Bar there, which was again a feature of the hotel when it was a Berni Inn. And you can see that the hotel entrance is round the corner through that door there, which it isn't now. It's now through the main door, and this door is sealed up. And the color scheme is whites on the moving lights of the sash windows, and then red, which you can scarcely see just on the top and the bottom on the fixed part of the light. This is a later photograph, and it's either just prior to Laksham's running it, or just afterwards. It's got the old sign work and the white windows. And many of you may remember this ridiculous roundabout rondel that it must have been the owners of the station. So it had been Great Western or Network Rail. It's now Great Western. I think at one time it was Network Rail and then it was Regional Railways. But this was originally comprised of 3 sections of concrete sewage pipe. And they dumped it in the middle of the road to make a very inconvenient roundabout for everyone, and that served absolutely no purpose. And in a time of shared space, it seemed extraordinary to make things quite so difficult. As a result of which it was endlessly collided with by lorries, because there were lorries making deliveries to the hotel and making deliveries to the back entrance to the Lord John. So this one has already been reduced by 1 level. So it's now just 2 levels of concrete pipe because it's been hit. And in the next view, we see that it has been hit again, and the second layer of concrete pipe has been smashed. And in fact, it's now been pushed off its center mounting. It was eventually shunted right to the side of the road before it was got rid of. The idea of actually putting something in that impedes traffic quite so badly and doesn't make anyone any safer, it made it impossible for delivery vehicles, even quite short ones, to get round. Now, this is in the Laksham era, the Gallage era. I keep getting the Christian name in Mr. Gallage's era, because the windows, I think, now improved because they're painted black, which would in fact probably be the way that the woodwork of the windows would have been painted when the hotel was built. That was much more the fashion, whereas now the fashion seems to be to paint all the woodwork on windows white. And you can see some of the signage from the Royal Thai Orchid Hotel. There is the single Imperial, which is another signature, because if we go back here, we can still see the previous picture. It still says Imperial Hotel. So whether the hotel was removed deliberately, or whether it fell off, I don't know. This is another picture from that era. You can see how, despite extensive cutting back, how extraordinarily powerful the Virginia creeper is. It comes back every year, and when it's allowed to grow, produces a magnificent array of color. But bearing in mind, it's got one south-facing face, the one on the right, and then it's got a west-facing face. It does just show you, without any of the artificial mechanisms to create a green wall, this is in many ways the finest living wall in Stroud. And that is the sign that Mr. Gallage installed, which I can't say is an improvement on the previous one. It seems a rather simplified version, but it does show, plus the hanging baskets we can see on the right, it does show the amount of effort and investment he put into the hotel. This was despite only having a 10-year lease. This was very actively managed and run, and he was very popular in the way he ran the hotel, including the fact that he would make meeting rooms available for local societies free of charge. There was a sort of laptop meeting on Friday evenings. There were Buddhist meditation classes. There were various meetings of various kinds, basically community meetings in rooms that he provided free of charge. And he also spent some money on the interior, doing it up in a sort of gentleman's club style, you might say, with these sort of Chesterfield sofas. But you can see money has been spent. It certainly wasn't shabby and run down. That's another view of the lounge area. I rather like the deep, dark purple wall at the back. Again, in a sort of very much in a club style. And another thing that he did, he collected spectacles to send back to his native Sri Lanka. And it was collected through the Rotary Club. And here they are sorting through the spectacles in one of the function rooms of the hotel. And the spectacles were collected either through a donations box at the front of the bar in the Imperial, and also through the agency of Specsavers on King Street, who again asked customers to bring in, or if they didn't want their own glasses, said, can we have take these glasses because we will be selling them to Sri Lanka. The glasses were sent to Sri Lanka, where apparently lenses are relatively cheap in Sri Lanka, but the frames are expensive. So people who can't afford to have glasses could be fitted by opticians with glasses, with frames provided by people from Stroud. And a late development was they then discovered some laboratories prepared to provide the lenses for free. So a very worthy scheme to actually provide glasses from Stroud and provide effectively free eye care for people in Sri Lanka. And also after the tsunami, he took it upon himself to build 7 houses to rehouse people who had lost their homes in the tsunami. So he was a very benevolent landlord, doing many things, both for the local community in Stroud and for the community back in Sri Lanka. So he is much missed, really, the fact that, and he ran the hotel and stewarded it very well for 10 years. But his 10-year lease came to an end. And one of the odd things about the hotel is that his 10-year lease, and these details come from research by Chas Townley, had a 10-year sublease from Green King, who had a lease from Overleen, which is run by the Azuz brothers. And the oddest thing about it is that despite the fact that he had a 10-year lease from Green King, which is Britain's largest pub company, and a brewer from Bury St Edmunds, there was no sign of a Green King branding, and there was no sign of Green King beers. And this, which still remains on the west-facing facade of the hotel above the arcading, which says function room available for hire, and is obviously sponsored by Marston's. And it also celebrates the beers available in the hotel. And the beers were from the Marston's range. So Marston's is the owner, but that has its own brewer at Burton-on-Trent. But there's also Witchwood, which has a brewery at Whitney. There's Mansfield, has a brewery at Mansfield in Nottinghamshire. Jennings, which has a brewery in Cumberland. These are all active breweries. Ringwood, which has a brewery in Hampshire. Banks's, which has a brewery in, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Banks's, which has a brewery in Wolverhampton. And Brack's Beer, I think the beers are now brewed by Witchwood at Whitney, but that was formerly the Henley-on-Thames brewery, and it's now a pub company. So it's very odd to find that the beers in the hotel were supplied by Marston's, and despite therefore being Green King, it is the normal practice, if you get a lease from a pub company, for there to be a requirement that you buy their beers from them, and other drinks often. You buy all the drinks from them at the prices they choose to mark up, and that's part of the rent effectively. So there's both the rent you pay and there's the wet rent. So it's odd that Green King has provided it effectively free of tie. Now, normally to negotiate a free of tie lease, you have to pay an awful lot more money. And some people do pay a lot of money to get a free of tie lease. But by and large, if you want a free of tie lease, it's because you want to put on a really interesting selection of, say, local beers. And occasionally there was Stroud Budding and Stroud Tom Long on the bar. But choosing Marston's as your main supplier would be very odd if you paid extra for the right to be a free house. So I don't think there was any extra charge. I don't think Green King wanted anything to do with the hotel or the bar. They didn't want their branding on it. They didn't want anything else, which is odd, bearing in mind they have so many pubs in the area. And in fact, they're not shy about their branding when they want to be proud of it, as here. So they have inn signs, and you can see this is a relatively modern one with the modern signage at the top, and even this little 3-dimensional crown with the arrows through it on the top. So quite an expensive piece of kit that they've installed there. on this rather lovely front of the Rutland Arms. And they're amongst the hotels that they and pubs that they own around here you may be familiar with. There's the Royal William at Birdlip, and there's the Hunters Hall at Kingscote. It used to be an independent pub, but now a Green King pub. And there are numerous other pubs in the area. Oh, also the Fronbridge Mill down on the other side of the A38. So it's not as though it's even outside their supply lines. They are supplying those pubs with Green King beers. So it's very odd and unexplained as to why they didn't want to brand and chose not to brand, and have never, it seems, chosen to run the Imperial as though it was one of their hotels or pubs. Perhaps because they thought that the money required to bring it up to standard was too much, but for whatever reason, they've had nothing to do with it. But it is odd to find it being offering other people's beers in a Green King pub, where Mr. Gallage does not appear to have actually had to pay extra for that privilege, judging by the he certainly hasn't exercised his freedom of choice to put on the sort of beers that anyone choosing to pay extra to be free of tie would have actually done so. Now, before Mr. Gallage's lease, the most famous post-war era of the Imperial was as a Berni Inn. And this seems to be the era that most people in Stroud, I wasn't in Stroud during this era, remember better. And in fact, not only remember the Hotel Best Buy, and people have waxed lyrical on Facebook and elsewhere about their memories of going to the Berni Inn with its famous famous steak menu. And in fact, in 1964, they bought the Imperial, converted it. I think it had 3 restaurants, a Scotch bar, and a public bar. So quite a substantial operation. I think one of the bars upstairs was described as being a Dover Soul bar. So quite a big operation. And in the same year, 1964, that they acquired the Imperial, they actually adopted the slogan, Berni Inns make eating out a pleasure. And there are the Berni Inn formula, which was derived from American steak restaurants. When Frank and Aldo Rossi, who come from Padua but had spent most of their time in South Wales before opening a cafe in Exeter, one of them was interned during the Second World War, and they had a lot of bad luck through the war with their businesses, so that the cafe in Exeter was bombed. But with the reparation damage, they acquired Hort's in Bristol, which was quite a large upmarket bar. And then when the meat ration was dropped in 1954, they acted very quickly and decided that a steak restaurant, a very simple steak restaurant modeled on the American model, was what the British needed. And that there was a suppressed appetite for eating out. And now that the meat was off ration, they decided basically to start by opening a pub that was a steak restaurant in Bristol, which is where they were based. It's where Hort's is still based, in fact, on Small Street. And this is the first Berni Inn, the Rammer Inn. It's actually still there. This is beside St. Nicholas's Market. St. Nicholas's Market is the building on the right. You recognize the bit of the glazed arcade crossing at the back, which is now basically a sort of a food market with lots of food stalls, Pie Minister, salsa, etc. Not dissimilar to what's happened at the Five Valleys Food Court. And this was the first Berni Inn with the styling. The styles of the pubs inside were identical. It was basically rough cast walls with artificial Tudor effect wooden beams there, painted black. So it's a black and white interior to give a sort of oldie world traditional feel, and done in a way that was actually meant to be very comfortable. The designer they brought in said, he said, if you've got cobwebs, keep them. And if you haven't got cobwebs, I'll give you some. So this was the first of the Berni Inns, and was so successful that within a year or so, they were expanding to other places in Bristol and beyond. It became very rapidly a national pub chain. It's quite a sign of the times that you will notice now, if you look at the window, this is now a distillery, cocktail bar and dining room. So it couldn't be more upmarket from Berni Inns. But a few years ago, on the 20th anniversary of it having opened as a Berni Inn, which it did in 1955, they actually had a Berni Inn night where they tried to recreate the classic Berni Inn menu, which, as many of you may remember, though it wasn't the original menu, but the classic menu was a prawn cocktail starter, rump steak for mains with chips and peas, and for afters was the famous Black Forest Gâteau. But when they started, it was actually a rather simpler menu. This is not sure what the date of this menu is, but this shows a strawberry sundae at the back. But there's the classic Berni Inn steak at the front. And a very early menu, you may be interested in the prices, which is from the early to mid 1970s. The menus were standard for all restaurants. One, you can see how astonishingly cheap the prices are. If you look at with your prime rump steak at 77p, comes with roll and butter, and to follow ice cream or cheese and biscuits. So it is actually a complete meal for the price. So it's a fixed price menu. It was designed again to make it less intimidating for people to come out. People wouldn't be tempted by too much. So you could just have one of those three meals. In fact, this is a slightly more elaborate one than they would have started in the 1950s, because they're actually offering half an oven roasted chicken, golden fried fillets of plaice. Originally, it would just have been steak. But the other famous thing is their offering of sherry in a glass or a schooner, which was a very large glass, and that was quite a draw. So there's an era of sophistication about it. Chilled fruit juice or tomato juice. So those are the only extras. This is a complete meal into itself, unless you want to add wine on the side. And when they say enjoy one of our international coffee specialities, the other speciality they did was liqueur coffees served in a glass as a floater. So this was a sort of level of sophistication, and various people, both on the Facebook pages I've mentioned, but somebody who remembers it fondly from his childhood is Nigel Slater, and he has memories of going to the Berni in Hereford, which was in another building called the Imperial. This is a list of inns. Berni inns make eating out of pleasure, and this is one side of it. I can't find the other side of it, but you can see that if you look top right, you can see Stroud Imperial Hotel Station Road, and you can see the extent on this list, stretching from Newport to quite a large enclave in Nottingham. They've got a pub in Oxford. They've got 2 in Rochester, 2 in Salisbury, 2 in Southport. You could see the extent of and the national reach. It was the first homegrown British food chain, and it was certainly the first homegrown pub chain. A pub chain rather than a brewery's tied estate, which would be confined to a limited area. So Green King at one point was a brewer whose beers were found in their pubs in East Anglia. It's now a national pub chain, but remains a brewer. But many of the formerly breweries that own their own estates are now just pub companies and will buy beer from elsewhere. So in a sense, this is almost the model of some of the pub companies we have today. This is a later menu after Grand Metropolitan had taken over the 1980s. And some of you this may look more familiar than the earlier, rather basic menu. You can see the prices have changed. Everything is much more extensive. It looks much more like a menu you'd expect to find in Harvester or Beefeater or even Wetherspoons. So there's extensive range of starters. We finally can see that there is actually a prawn cocktail starter there. I was surprised it wasn't on the early one. But the oddity here is we still can't find the famous Black Forest Gâteau, which was the other great feature. It's not on the dessert menu. And there's an interesting little note up here saying the price you pay no longer includes ice cream or cheese and biscuits, and we have reduced our main course prices. This means that you are free to choose from our wine selection desserts. So the original fixed price menu with the ice cream or cheese and biscuits included has been abandoned in favor of an a la carte menu. And you can look at the sort of vaguely late 1970s typefaces here. So some of you may have memories of that period rather than anything else. Where they had 2 Berni inns in a town, they would sometimes have a Berni. So in Cambridge, where this is, the basic one was in the Turk's Head. That was a Berni, and that's where you got several floors of restaurants. And then they had a much smaller outlet here, which they called a Berni steak bar. And in towns where they had several outlets, they would often have one separate, much smaller outlet, just specializing in steak. I believe, looking at photographs, this appears now to be a McDonald's, which again tells you something about what's happened. But this was in Rose Crescent in Cambridge, of one of their two outlets. One of their most famous outlets was the New Inn in Gloucester. So you can see the range of buildings that they were actually taking over and converting, which at one point had 7 restaurants inside it, as well as 3 bars. It's astonishing how little of that space is utilized as current day, as well as hotel accommodation above. And there's a story told that the Berni brothers used to like the New Inn so much that they used to drive out from Bristol, where they both lived very modestly, in their identical Silver Ghost Rolls Royces. And the Silver Ghost Rolls Royces would be parked outside with the chauffeurs standing beside them while they went in and dined together inside. So it could not have been a higher recommendation than to know that the Berni brothers were eating in the place that you went to eat, and they were eating from the same menu. Les patrons mangent ici, as is said in the trade. So they were obviously so proud of both the chain and of the New Inn that they even had a bit like, I have to say, I'm a stealer of beer mats. So the idea that I would actually pay money in order to actually acquire a set of beer mats. But you notice that the front beer mat here is indeed the inside courtyard of the New Inn. I can't work out what the other ones were. So it's beginning to acquire some of the characteristics of a chain, and clearly a chain with a fan club. You know, people were very keen. You knew if you went to any town, and people often complain about chains, but if you go into a strange town, there are some things that's actually quite nice to stumble upon. If you happen to like Pizza Express, go to a town and not see an anonymous pizzeria that you've no idea about, but to see Pizza Express when you have a rough idea, if you like Pizza Express, of what it's going to be like, or to see, again, to see a Costa Coffee, if Costa Coffee is the sort of thing you like, and to go to Wetherspoons, if Wetherspoons is the sort of thing you like, or a Nicholson's pub, or whatever it is. So people have, I think, a love-hate relationship with chains, which is one of the reasons why they've been so successful, or McDonald's for that matter. I'm astonished at almost the first day that the McDonald's in Stroud, after I think the first or second lockdown, opened up their drive-through only, and there were queues of traffic along merry walks of people who just appeared almost for an expedition. The only thing they could do was to drive to McDonald's and go through the drive-through. And Berni Inn became so famous that there's a wonderful skit on the original. You can find it online, but it's originally, goodness gracious me, started on Radio 4. And recently they rebroadcast the episode on Radio 4 Extra. Unfortunately, it's not available at the moment because of Radio 4's Extra's infuriating habit of having some things only for 30 days and some things available for over a year. And this isn't, but there's a famous skit there, which is called Going for an English, which is about going for an English in Bombay. And it starts off by saying it's Friday night in Bombay, and the location is the Berni Inn. So the idea of the Berni Inn as the archetypal English restaurant even gets parodied in Goodness Gracious Me. And the idea of the skit, which works because it's a Berni Inn, but would work without that, is it's going for an English, and they basically go there and they want all the rolls, and they want 48 white bread rolls. They have no idea really of the cuisine. They ask what goes to the rolls, and then they want butter with it. They order 48 plates of chips and get upset when they're told that they probably overordered. The most famous phrase in it is when one of the characters says, "What's the blandest thing on the menu?" And so it's a complete reversion of the idea of the English who get tanked up on a Friday evening and then go for an Indian. And the men ask out of bravado, "What's the hottest thing on the menu?" and challenge one another to have a vindaloo or a tindaloo or whatever is the hottest thing on the menu. Simply, they ask for what's the blandest thing on the menu. So you can still find that, not the radio version, but you can find a version that was done for, I think, a Red Nose Day and a television version. And there is also the original BBC version, as the radio one isn't available. But it's still a very, very funny skit, a complete inversion of it. And it is significant that it's a Berni Inn that's in Bombay. Berni Inn had such loyalty that this is a wake with a floral tribute being paid at the Turk's Head Berni Inn in Cambridge when it closed. It survived as a pub, eventually as a gay pub, and now finally as a clothing shop. So you can see again that the loyalty that people had to the chain because of its cheap prices, because of the ambience. It does have something of the sort of following that that people have of particular pub chains that they follow today. But again, Berni is perhaps unusual in being a pub chain that actually had a character and was much loved. Looking at the post-war era before the Berni Inn, there isn't really much to report. But the Beatles got to the Imperial before Princess Elizabeth did. The Beatles performed twice in Stroud. So there's the Berni, the hotel again in its possibly pre-war or early post-war stage, where this is a 1950 advertisement from Grace's Guide, which describes it as the leading hotel, a good headquarters from which to explore the Cotswolds, and an excellent halfway house from the Midlands and north to the southwest, before the motorways, obviously. Excellent food and comfortable beds opposite the railway station, fully licensed RAC, and the telephone number is just 77. And the Beatles played in Stroud twice, on Saturday, 31st of March in 1964, and on Saturday, the 1st of September. And it's believed they stayed in the Imperial on one of these occasions, but it's not certain. George was asked in a Beatles fanzine, did you stay in the Imperial in Stroud on the 1st of November? And he said no, but then the Beatles weren't in Stroud in November. But people have reported seeing them going out, but I haven't been able to ascertain as to whether they stayed in, and nor has Lakshman Galaj, who did ask people if anyone knew which date the Beatles had stayed and also which rooms they'd stayed in. I think perhaps he thought of theming the rooms as John, George, Paul and Ringo. But anyway, nothing came of that. So they stayed there once or possibly twice in 1949. And Princess Elizabeth arrived a little later in 1950, hot on the heels of the Beatles. But in fact, she had been to Slimbridge. So this was on the way back from Slimbridge when she came to Stroud, inspected a guard of honor. This is outside the Imperial. You can see the Imperial in the background. And you can see here, this is the red brick wall that flanks the sorting office. It's the back of the sorting office where the vehicles deliver and collect the mail. And you can see the number of staff. I presume from the post office and sorting room, the roof is absolutely packed with staff. So here's Princess Elizabeth in March 1950, inspecting the guard of honor. There are 4 photographs here which show the car coming from Slimbridge, a party from the Stroud, from the girls' high school on the left, and meeting civic dignitaries, top left, and signing the visitor book in the Imperial on the right, with its manager looking on, Mr. F.H. Coucher or Coucher, depending whether he was French or not, which running a hotel it's quite possible he was. And that's a close-up of that, where it says Princess Elizabeth signs her name in the visitor's book at the Imperial Hotel Stroud. She is watched by the manager, Mr. F.H. Coucher, and Mr. F.L. Daniels, chairman of the council. This week's issue of the Gloucester Journal will contain 4 pages of pictures of the visit of Princess Elizabeth to Stroud and Slimbridge. 4 pages. So royalty. So we've had pop royalty and we've had real royalty visiting there. The history of the Imperial Hotel goes back to 1654, but this will actually be a fairly brief section. You'll be glad to hear. And it starts with the Old George. The Old George was a hotel facing the High Street, and all that you can see of it now is on the left-hand side. So particularly these 3 windows, but also all the windows on the left-hand side, where in fact there's J. Rule's Bistro along here. And it faced out onto the High Street. But originally, as the information board here shows, before Union Street was pushed through, those 3 windows on the left are the same as these 3 windows on the left. And you can see just beyond that, the George Inn actually spanned, it had an assembly room where the councils met. It spanned the road on an arch. So the hotel was on the left and then spanning the road, and on the right where the Swan Inn is. somebody appears to have pasted as a bit of graffiti. It looks like a picture of a mobile phone with the cross of St. George on it. But anyway, you can read the history of it, but it was for many years the principal hostelry. Then Union Street came through, and a new hotel was built. Sorry, this is it. If this is the Old George looking up from there. See, again, look at the three windows, three top windows immediately. First one, those three windows there. If we look there are the three windows, and then Union Street was pushed through. The assembly room bridging the street was abolished, and then this is looking the other way. So it's very busy because this is clearly a farmer's market day, because Stroud never looks that busy at any other time. And this is also when the Swan Inn was still open, which is basically inhabits part of what was left of the George. And again, those three windows there are the same three windows before the assembly room that bridged the street between the two sides of the street. So when Union Street had been driven through and that had been abolished, the Royal George, a hotel was built at the bottom of George Street, on the bottom of George Street, on the corner of King Street. So George Street goes off to the right, and this is, you can see the Greyhound Hotel in the background and Lansdowne moving off there. This is King Street, and this rather fine hotel with this huge impressive crest at the front was built, and that eventually was named the Royal George, and that was the premier coaching inn of the town, with the demise of the Old George after Union Street was driven through. And eventually, after the Imperial was built in 1863, this then became the town's first cinema, and went through various manifestations before it was demolished in 1917 and eventually replaced by Burton's. So you can see the Art Deco building of Burton's. So that's where the Royal George Hotel was. And if you look at King Street on the right-hand side, you'll again be able to see the same details in the background. So there's Burton's, which is now, what was Burton's is now on the ground floor is Savers, and now has this rather ingenious curio lounge, which has taken over what was a chemist shop on the ground floor to provide access to what was the Burton's billiard room, because Burton's, if you bought a suit from Burton's, you also made a member of the Burton's Billiard Club. So there were billiard rooms upstairs, which are now occupied by the Curio Lounge. And actually it makes a very pleasant bar with views out. And you can see how pleasant the Woolworths building was before it was rebuilt as that sort of inanimate brick box, which it currently is. This is the best photograph I could find, courtesy of, or rather against the will of, Frith Postcards. But so basically we can see the Old George gave way to the Royal George, which then gave way to the Imperial Hotel, because with the coming of the railway, a coaching inn wasn't what was wanted. And so with the construction of the Imperial Hotel, this became instantly the finest hotel in town. You can see it's much bigger than the Royal George. And the action basically had moved to the railway. Now, Benjamin Bucknall, Stroud's greatest architect, had a relatively short life. He was born in Rodborough. He spent some years in Swansea, where he built some buildings, and there's a couple of churches in South Wales. But he started off being, with the help of William Lee, who was to build Woodchester Mansion, got him an apprenticeship with Charles Hanson in Bristol, a notable Victorian architect. And Hanson was a Catholic, and eventually Bucknall became a Catholic. And that's a picture of him looking like an almost identikit Victorian gentleman with a beard. And he became a Catholic, and William Lee, who was a Catholic, developed both Woodchester Mansion. He basically was fleeing persecution in Staffordshire, and he also built many buildings around Nymsfield. And Nymsfield to this day remains a sort of Catholic enclave, complete with a Catholic school, and a lot of the buildings and institutions. So there's also a convent there. A lot of the institutions that were influenced by William Lee, and Bucknall was Lee's favourite architect. And you can see the number of buildings that Bucknall was responsible for within the Stroud area. There are other ones, there's a church at Fairford, there are other ones nearby, but I'm looking at the Stroud area. Worcester Mansion is most famous, and this also gives the English Heritage grading, which is grade 1 listed. The Four Winds Church Street, Nimpsfield, which is grade 2 listed. Scar Hill at Nimpsfield, grade 2. Cow houses and shelter sheds, Nimpsfield, grade 2. Granny with cart shed, Nimpsfield, grade 2. St. Stephen's, not a church as it sounds like, a cottage ornate, and a deliberately sort of Gothic cottage, 1860, grade 2. Tocknall's house, a private house built for the Codrington family out at Painswick, listed at grade 2. West Grange, Lovedays Mead, Badbrook, which very few people know about. It's now unfortunately swamped by concrete mock-walled houses, so concrete block pretending to be Cotswold stone. And that's just at Badbrook on the other side of Beecher's Green. So that's well worth having a look at. The convent of St. Rose of Lima, Beecher's Green, where he built both he didn't build the Church of the Immaculate Conception, but he built the convent and the convent chapel, grade 2 listed. And Holy Trinity Church, Snad, where he reconstructed it on previous work, and that's grade 2 listed. And then there's number 4 to 6 Whitehall, unlisted, and the Imperial Hotel, unlisted. And what's remarkable is that not only is every other building in the area been listed, some at grade 1, so that's the highest status, Worcester Mansion, every other building at grade 2. But remarkably, even cow houses and shelter sheds, because they're by Benjamin Bucknall, rate a grade 2 listing. Even a granary with a cart shed at Nimpsfield rates a grade 2 listing. So almost everything that he touches manages to get grade 2 listed or grade 1 listed, except inexplicably for 4 to 6 Whitehall or the Imperial Hotel. And I heard recently through contact that Juliet had with him from, his name was Michael Hedges, a former chair of the Civic Society, that there was some uncertainty as to whether the Imperial Hotel or Whitehall or the 4 to 6 Whitehall were built by Bucknall. And I was astonished by this because all of the documents I have seen refer to it as by Mr. Benjamin Bucknall and not by. The suggestion is that they may have been built by his brother, who was a builder, and adopting some of Bucknall's characteristic motifs. But Bucknall's characteristic motifs are very expensive and quirky. So oddly, if you were actually just wanting to do a sort of a knockoff of the style, there are many things you would actually choose to economize on. And I'm going to show, because particular attention, I'm going to go briefly through a couple of these buildings. Don't worry, I'm not going to go to the cow houses and shelter sheds and all the granary cart sheds, but just to give you an idea of his style. You've probably been to Worcester Mansion, a magnificent building, inexplicably abandoned. What I found extraordinary about it was the fact that it's effectively hollow inside. The floors weren't inserted. They built everything up to the roof and made it watertight. But whereas modern buildings, the floors are used to build the next layer. And of course, part of the reason was that all the floors were going to be vaulted, so you can still see the springing out to the vaults. And the building's effectively held up by the buttresses on the outside, not by the floors, which would be imposing an outward thrust. And there are stone gutters here, which are one of his specialities that define his one of the quirky things he does. In this case, there aren't the downpipes he normally does, but these rather fine gargoyles to throw the water away from the building. And he also specializes in these unusual capped chimneys, sometimes cylindrical, sometimes square. I've decided to only show one picture of Worcester Mansion because there are thousands you can find online, and many of you, in fact, will actually have seen the building and gone around it, because it is a quite remarkable experience to go around. It's certainly one of the absolute jewels in the area in terms of an architectural visit and a day out. Tocknall's house, which is a private house for the Codringtons, not the same as Tocknall's Court, grade 2 listed again. This is north of Painswick, and I could find literally not a single photograph of the exterior. I know that the owners are very concerned about their privacy. The Civic Society did actually manage to arrange a visit a few years ago, and it's a fascinating, extraordinary house. This is from the National Monuments record, and it shows the staircase. And unfortunately, what it doesn't show is the most remarkable feature about the staircase, which is it is a double spiral staircase. So we're seeing the main staircase, But inside, there's a separate cylinder with a separate set of stairs for the servants, obviously on a much tighter radius, and light is provided through open Gothic arches between the two. So effectively, the family would be moving up on the generous steps on the outside, and could see the servants racing up and down on the much tighter radius of the internal staircase. I cannot find a photograph of that. And when we went on our tour, we were specifically forbidden to take photographs of either the outside or the inside. So it's a remarkable staircase, one of the most remarkable ones I've ever seen. But sadly, I can't show you anything more than this tempting taste of it. This, which you can go and see, at least the views that I've shown here, this is West Grange. You can see some similarity in the arrangement of windows. If we go and have a look back at Winchester Mansion, if you look at the style of the windows here, where the windows move from a set of 4 lights there to 3 lights, and then the 3 lights are then surmounted by pairs of double lights, you can see similarity in the mullioned windows as applied at West Grange. Similarities again in the chimneys with their unusual caps at the top, cylindrical. Again, stone gutters. You can see the stone corbels holding the gutters up. I don't know whether it had stone downpipes. If so, there are no sign of them anymore. So there are cast iron downpipes. That's a view from the side. You can see just how closely encroached. This is a garage block in concrete block pretending to be Cotswold stone. Again, you can see his fastidiousness in grouping the chimneys in these unusual asymmetrical patterns. You can see the stone gutters running along there and the cast iron drain pipes. And this rather moody photograph, which I didn't take, which again shows you the concrete block, garage block, and shows you just how close to open countryside it is. But here's perhaps the clearest view of all, both of the grouping of the chimneys, but also the stone gutter supported on stone corbels, which is a feature we find in all his buildings. Number 46 Whitehall, because it's not listed, is undated. It's a remarkable terrace of townhouses, and you may well have seen it because this is a view from the garden of Trinity Church. So it's the last building on Whitehall. Here's Trinity Road coming across. That's Hollow Lane going up. Here the road divides between Horns Road, which goes along beside the church, and then just slightly to the left there's Bisley Road. So there's finally just this terrace of 3 houses, and that's one house with the 3 windows. That's another house with 3 windows. And there's another house with 3 windows. But one striking thing about the layout of the house is that it's not because of the distortion in the photograph that I've taken, but it is indeed true that the 3rd house, the windows are set much wider apart. And again, so normally in a house like this, you'd expect all the sets of windows to be 3, 3, 3, and they are indeed, except these ones have been set much wider apart, and the house itself is much bigger. And we'll see from the back just how much bigger it is. That's it looking the other way. That's it as if you were to come up from Middle Street. Interestingly, almost every other building on Whitehall is listed. So the buildings on the left running up to 46 Whitehall, and all the cottage buildings on the right-hand side, all are listed, some for group value. This is not listed, which makes it even more extraordinary. We can see the detail of again, the stone gutter with the stone corbels. There's no sign of the original stone downpipes, but it's likely there would have been. You will notice that the window shape, which he uses particularly here and at the Imperial Hotel, is known as a Carnarvon arch, where basically you have this sort of corbel forming a shoulder and then a lintel. These are actually much more elaborate than the ones at the Imperial, but basically means it gives a window a sort of a complicated Gothic shape, and yet actually behind it is a very simple wooden sash window. So basically it means the fenestration is quite easy because all the fenestration is set behind the stonework. But if you go to the top of Whitehall, it's well worth having a look at that building. This is looking the other way. Hollow Lane is on the right. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Hollow Lane's on the right. That is the old Whitehall post office there, and that's Middle Street moving down over there. and Trinity Street is down there. We're now going to go and look at the back of the building, and this is looking from the end closest to Middle Street, and you'll see the back is actually quite a complicated array of shapes. So these are the buildings. These two here are the first two houses, and the third house, the larger one, the back is entirely different. So you'd expect it to be just a continuous terrace, and it isn't. If we go and look closer again, so you can see the first two houses have basically this double sort of catamaran roof style. So there's a gutter between the front and the back roof. But the much larger third house has a considerable gable extension, a small two-story lower block, and it's clearly a much larger enterprise than the others. So what looks fairly symmetrical from the front turns out to be very asymmetrical from the back. That's another view of it. They're clearly divided into flats, and the building on the end actually had, depending on how many the doorbells work, it either had 4 doorbells or 8 doorbells. So it's possible even it's divided into rooms and looks in fairly poor condition. But these two buildings actually look in very good condition and look as though they're in single ownership. So that's another view showing clearly the stone gutters and the stone corbels. And if we turn finally to the Imperial Hotel, you'll see just how similar the details at Whitehall are from here. It's so clear that it is from the same hand. Now, if we look at some of the details here, we can see the stone gutters, the stone corbels, and still intact in this image are, or I'm not sure it is actually intact, but that is the stone snow hopper where the stone downpipes stretch from. But I think these pipes are too small to be stone. So I think already at this stage, the downpipes have been replaced by cast iron. And you can see the fact that these are from the bathrooms or just basins possibly at the time from the hotel rooms. So suggesting that that there were at least sinks and basins in the bedrooms, if not fully en suite. If this is the windows of the Imperial Hotel, you can see the corbels at the top. That's Whitehall, slightly more elaborate corbels supporting the stone gutter, slightly more elaborate windows. Another shot of 4 to 6 Whitehall, and then back to the slightly simplified Carnarvon arch of the Imperial Hotel. Both buildings are quirky and individualistic and highly original, and certainly meriting listing. If we look up the front of in its current boarded up state, if we look up towards the chimney and now go for a close-up, you can see both the stone gutter, the stone corbels, and this is the top of this is the snow hopper at the top of what was a stone downpipe, which may or may not have been in the picture shown previously. And this is a later soil and vent pipe added, but as you can see, the rest of the plumbing has been reorganized. So I am uncertain, while those are the original stone hoppers at the top, I am uncertain as to whether the pipes shown are stone. They look a bit narrow for stone, but the other thing he did was he liked to have his downpipes well clear of the building, and these do seem well clear of the building, but they just look very narrow to be stone. But certainly none of them have survived, and the front of the building is not in a good style. Now, as to where we go from here, the lease was finally returned to the landlord by Greene King on May the 10th. I checked with Greene King, and they actually have it's certainly not an active property, but they actually said they have no record of it at all, or rather in their trading department, they had no record of it. And I said, well, look, you only returned the lease surrendered the lease on May the 21st. And they said he would have to go back to estates. And I've contacted estates, but they haven't come back to me. So your choice at the moment for a hotel in the center of town is now the London Hotel is basically a bail hostel. They've even crudely painted out the word hotel. And it is well worth, if you want to be amused, reading some of the accounts on TripAdvisor of people who, astonished by how cheap it was, chose to stay there. And there are people who have left in the middle of the night, running away in fear of their lives. So it's certainly not a place that you would actually want to go. And yet, not so long ago, when Richard Rogers and the urban Renaissance task force came on a visit to Stroud at the instigation of David Drew when he was MP. It was decided to put them up in the London hotels. So until recently, the London hotel was clearly regarded as a very good place if you could put such a prestigious party of visitors in it. So what we have left, now that the Imperial is closed, what we have left is the Premier Inn. Premier Inn is a big chain. You've probably stayed in them yourselves at 800 town and city centre hotels. This is the one we have in Stroud. The building on it's effectively edge of centre, right next to Tesco's. The Tesco car park is here. This is the original Stratford Lodge. So the Stratford Park house is the one which is now the museum in the park. This is the lodge. And when I came to Stroud, it was derelict. So one thing that the Premier Inn have done is they've conjoined it to another of these Mockwell concrete block buildings, and then built a sort of a top lit restaurant bar connecting the two. Not a wholly unpleasing design, apart from the use of concrete block and pretending it's stone. There you can see clearly the original lodge building on the left, and there's the name they've given the Old Nelson, which is the bar hotel, and that's the back entrance, which gives you more of the flavour of the motel style. It is effectively a motel with a big car park in front of it. So clearly we can't tempt Premier Inn to come in. They've got their own purpose-built premises. They're not going to be very interested. The other big chain of budget hotels is Travelodge with 760 town and city centre hotels. I'm looking at the big chains because while it's possible that some individual operator will come in, fall in love with, as Lakshman Galange did, will fall in love with the Imperial Hotel, and will immediately decide that they absolutely want to restore it and bring it up into use. There's the Chapman Group in Gloucester, though it's not very impressive what they've done with the New Inn and the various other buildings they've occupied there. But it's possible some small operator like that or an individual would. But really, the market has almost collapsed now in terms of there are one or two individual operators. Otherwise, there are the big chains or there are boutique hotels. The big chains are Premier Inn and Travelodge. Travelodge is unlikely to want to come here because they have a purpose-built outlet at Stonehouse. I wanted to show a photograph of that, but I couldn't find all the images that they displayed me. Turned out not to be downloadable, but turned out to be web JPEGs, which therefore meant I couldn't incorporate them at all. So I'm not even sure where this one is, but you'll be familiar with. There's one just on the way into Gloucester on the left-hand side as part of the Gloucester Quays development, a rather more attractive looking one than this. But they go for this rather basic style of square windows. It's a much more basic style than the Premier Inn, and the Premier Inn is pretty basic. So they're fairly formulaic hotels with quite large numbers of bedrooms, though Premier Inns tend to be slightly smaller. So, for instance, I was surprised to discover that even with the motel annex, the Premier Inn at Stratford Lodge only has 32 bedrooms, which is actually fairly crucial in terms of doing this. Now, we're also looking for somebody who's actually interested in restoring historic building. So, because obviously with the Imperial Hotel, we want somebody who actually has a care and respect for historic buildings. And Malmaison is perhaps the best known boutique hotels, and they have just 17 of these. The word boutique I put in inverted commas because that's the word they use. But they're very much city centre hotels. So the first thing is, would they be interested in Stroud? And the answer is probably no. And the other thing is that their projects are very ambitious. They take on buildings that most people wouldn't think of converting to a hotel. This is the Greek Orthodox Church in Glasgow. And they also, by and large, have a very large number of rooms. So they tend to, whether through adding buildings at the back, they will often have as many as 100 or 120 bedrooms. And again, specializing in something that's in a city center location and with a strong architectural style. This very fine building, now a Malmaison, but it started right at the other end of the market as the Siemens Mission. So it couldn't be more rough and ready, Scottish baronial style, and now beautifully restored and has become a Malmaison. So it has gone up market with a rocket. You can see, though, again, to increase the number of rooms, you can see the new block at the back, because to pay for all this, the architecture and the cost of conversion, they do specify a very large number of rooms. So I don't think Malmaison is for Stroud. This is the one in Manchester, a former cotton warehouse on the left, massive new extension on the right. It was eventually also a doll's factory. This is one in Newcastle. This is the famous eyelid lifting bridge, that sort of or twisting bridge. And there is the Malmaison standing right on the quayside. Again, they go for the most central location they can. And that is a former cooperative building. You can even see the cooperative text on the top, Cooperative Society Limited. A very American style block, but very solid interwar American style. Looks as though it's made of some sort of terracotta or faience. And perhaps their most astonishing conversions is of Oxford Prison. And the precinct of the prison now has got various, in part of the redevelopment, it's got various things going on, new buildings, and but it's astonishing that Malmaison should have decided that something as down market as a prison should actually make a hotel, with all the restrictions that prisons involve. This is what it looks like inside. So if you really want to pay a lot of money to go to prison, or go to a Victorian prison, this is the classic galleried system of a Victorian prison, and with the cast down staircases. You can see how faithful they are to the building. That's a view looking down, seeing again, the carpeting obviously is not what you would find before, but the respect with which they've treated the building as to keep the character of the building intact, and to try and give some people something that's very different. It should be said, you will be paying, instead of paying, say, £35 to go to the Premier Inn or something like that, you will be paying something between £65 to £150 to stay at Malmaison, depending on the time. And it also shows you, because the difficulty of it being a prison, just how complicated the room designs are. So you can see the windows are not located in the most convenient positions if you were designing hotels. So they're prepared to sacrifice a lot of convenience in terms of to achieve this unique boutique charm. I'd very much like to stay in one because they do look enchanting, and they are to be commended just for the number of buildings that they rescued and brought up to and put to another use. Right, we now turn to Wetherspoon. This is a controversial subject because, particularly as I'm pubs officer for Stroud Camera, and there are many people in camera, and probably not in camera, who think Wetherspoons are basically set out to destroy the English pub as we know it, the British pub as we know it, and that exactly Wetherspoon spells doom on all the other pubs in the area. I don't think that's the case. I think Wetherspoons have been an amazing benefit, both in terms of the prices they charge and in terms of the buildings that they have restored. But the key thing is that Wetherspoon started with pubs. And of course, we have one in Stroud. This is the old Edwardian post office with a sorting room behind, renamed the Lord John. I wish they'd renamed it the Lord John Russell, because it's in Russell Street, but why people should automatically have to supply Russell at the end of it, though it seems to be known locally just as the Lordy. But they always, a lot of care has been taken actually to preserve the character. So that is an original doorway. That is the other original doorway. And this is an entirely new doorway. So you can see the care they've taken to insert a second doorway in the pub. This is this doorway accesses flats on the upper floors. So these two doors access the pub. So this is a second entirely new door, and you can see just how well the detailing has been done. So there was a window here, they've turned it into a doorway, and it looks as though it must always have been like that. And this is not the most exciting of conversions that they've done, and it's not indeed the nicest of Wetherspoon's pubs necessarily to go to, though that may be more of a comment on Stroud than it is on Wetherspoon's. But on the various tours that I've organised for the Civic Society, I discovered on a tour we did of Birmingham and Bourneville, we wanted to time it so we would reach Bourneville in time for the Carillon on a Saturday. And I discovered, looking at the map on the way, that there is this spectacular Grade 2 starred listed building. It's an interwar building called the Black Horse at Northfield. It was designed for Davenport's Brewery, and it's one of the largest and most impressive of that era's mock Tudor Tudor Beatles style pubs, designed on a gigantic scale to attract people coming by car, with its own bowling green, with libraries, reading rooms, very much trying to get away from the idea of the gin palace. Now, these days, many pubs are being retrofitted to look like gin palaces. But in the early years after the First World War, and particularly in Birmingham, where the licensing authorities wanted to reduce the number of pubs, there was the Victorian pub was regarded as a source of sin and moral turpitude and danger. So when trading in licenses to build larger pubs, many of the brewers would specifically go for this Old English Tudor Beathan style in order to get back to the healthy image of the English country inn, rather than the supposedly decadent image of the town centre gin palace, tempting people to the path of drunkenness. And this is a truly huge building. We stopped on the way there because it was a convenient place to have coffee, and also Wetherspoon's toilets are particularly fine. And in fact, every year they seem to win Toilet of the Year award for England, Toilet of the Year award for Wales, Toilet of the Year award for Scotland, and the overall Toilet of the Year. And it's one of the things they really specialize in, because research indicates particularly women will not go to a pub if the toilet facilities are not top notch. So the design and by and large cleanliness is exceptional. So we were looking basically for a pit stop for coffee and a pee, and this happened to fit the bill, and it was perfectly en route. It's very spectacular inside. It's recently been upgraded from grade 2 to grade. These are on the upper floors where they're particularly spectacular, the structure on the ceiling, but every room and every space is different. That's the sort of banqueting hall at the top. You see the extraordinary stone fireplace. So if ever you're passing by Northfield on your way into, it's not on your way into Birmingham, it is well worth a visit, whether for a cup of coffee or a pint of beer. When we went on a tour of Oxford, I again wanted to find a place to actually stop on the way before we reached Oxford for a coffee and a pee, so that we would, when we reached Oxford, we were arriving at Wolfson College, and I didn't want immediately people to be looking for the limited toilet facilities that we'd have there. And actually, I went out with David Austin. He drove me around. We went first to what the coach company had recommended at a service area just outside Oxford, and we were appalled by the cafe, the crowdedness, the quality of the toilets, the fact the toilets were on a separate level. We then went and explored several outlets on that road, several different cafes and places, and found all of them appalling. And I did a bit more research, and then went out with Pam Brown on another day, and she drove me. I don't have a car. She drove me. We went and visited various other places on an alternative route, including we went to the rather lovely town of Witney, and this is the Butter Market in Witney. This rather fine building, and that red fascia you can see behind there is a Wetherspoon's conversion of what was a cinema. It doesn't look like a cinema. It looks, in fact, like a sort of almost new build. There's very little of the cinema left inside, but again, it had the basic Wetherspoon virtues of cheap coffee with unlimited refills and very good toilets, including spacious disabled toilets. So that proved very good. But again, this was not a first choice. I had not set out to find a Wetherspoon's pub to stop at on the way, but it's believe me, having spent 2 days exploring all the possibilities on the A40 and other roads approaching Oxford, this proved to be an extremely good choice. And if I was going to Oxford again on a tour, that's certainly somewhere I would take people. Well, that shows you the pubs which you may know and love, or may know and dislike, or you may just know the Lord John in Stroud and have strong views about it one way or another, either an enthusiasm for the State Club or the Curry Club, or dislike of the whole establishment. Wetherspoon now has 55 town and city centre hotels. And the important thing about these hotels is that they're in towns as well as in city centres. And in fact, they're also in suburbs. So unlike Malmaison, and they're also much smaller in terms of the number of bedrooms. They're much more on the scale. Now, I've actually stayed in one of them. This is the Briar Rose in Birmingham. The building, a rather nice sort of that Art Deco-ish building. It suited me because it was very near the station. Right in the centre. It also happened to be the cheapest hotel in Birmingham that day. I happened to have acquired a booklet of vouchers given to students, which gave you 20% off. And even though it said you had to book it in advance, when I showed it on turning up, they knocked 20% off the bill. So this was actually the cheapest place to stay in Birmingham. I had a very odd room with windows at a high level, because that's one of the problem of not building purpose built. But it's a standard. It's quite a pleasant Wetherspoons pub downstairs, which is a separate hotel entrance at the side. But that is originally the headquarters of the Abbey Building Society, which then became Abbey National, and of course is now part of Santander. So it's not the most spectacular of the Wetherspoons hotel conversions, but it is one I can actually say that I've stayed in twice. This one at Ruthin in North Wales is rather spectacular. Both the Castle Hotel. So, and again, the important thing about this is, unlike the Briar Rose, which is an office conversion, this is a hotel to hotel conversion. And you can see this very fine sort of function room added on here. The original very tall Georgian building, and it is a separate building, but there's a wonderful cascade of dormers on the left-hand side. So an extraordinary composition, and I think it's something like 25 bedrooms. So these are not large buildings compared with what with something like the Imperial Hotel, which has I think it's 23 bedrooms now. It used to have 25. I think 2 of the bedrooms have now become a self-contained apartment. This is the Globe Hotel in King's Lynn, and I've not stayed here, but I've stayed in King's Lynn elsewhere, and I've gone inside, and there's this rather fine example of the lattice woodwork on the inside. Again, a very high quality conversion. This is a hotel in, I've forgotten where this one is now. This is the Linen Hall, and it's in, I think it's in Aberdeen. It's
Bury St Edmunds.
It's Bury St Edmunds?
Yep.
Really?
I believe so.
Right, okay. Bury Hall, Bury St Edmunds. I'm not sure about that, but anyway, I'm not sure. This is Camborne in Cornwall, another fine conversion. This I've chosen mainly because it's nearby. This is the King's Head at Monmouth. Again, another example of a hotel to hotel conversion. Though it has to be said, in terms of the Wetherspoons are at their best when they're converting buildings that weren't pubs or hotels in the first place, because then some of their sort of slightly, in terms of their pub fitting, their slightly sort of predictable design features don't sort of rub up against the original features too much when they're doing it, say, in a sorting office like in Stroud. This is the Portland Arms at Chesterfield, another fine interwar pub with this sort of the various high quality stonework and mock Tudor detailing on the top. And this again chosen because of its closeness, and also because of what a difficult building project was. This is the Royal Hop Pole in Tewkesbury, famous for the fact that Samuel Pepys stopped there. So there's even a little plaque commemorating his visit. So he features in the, sorry, not Samuel Pepys, Mr. Pickwick in the Pickwick Papers stops here, and then they go on their way, having refilled their bottles, and carouse all their way on from the Royal Hop Pole. And I remember that before it was a Wetherspoons pub, when it was actually still a very fine building, but not in a very good state. And to give you an idea that they're not put off by difficult conversions, this shows you the roofscape at the back. And you can see both the size of the building stretching down to the, I think at that point it's the Avon, that the garden stretched right the way down to it. The size of and the complexity of the roofscape, and they've obviously inserted some new work there on the right-hand side. So they're capable of taking on very large challenges. You can see this is the garden area. This is one of their, because it's got a large garden, one of the pubs that will be reopening its garden areas on the 12th. Therefore, and this is another couple of hotels, the Saltoun Inn in Saltoun in Scotland, a very dour Scottish Presbyterian design. And again, it's quite nice they don't overbrand their hotels. They still allow them to look distinctive, both with their ensigns and their names. They did, when they started, tend to name everything the Moon Under Water or Wetherspoons, but that was rapidly dropped, which again is the way Berni Inn functions. So Berni Inn did not rename the Imperial. It was just the Imperial, and it was a Berni Inn. And finally, there's the Yarborough Hotel. I can't remember where that one is now, actually. I'd meant to put these, insert the actual names of where it is. I'm not sure where that one is. I think that may be somewhere in Norfolk. But you can see the variety of buildings they've taken on, and they've also taken on existing hotels as well as new buildings. And we're talking about room sizes up from, say, 15 to 35, which is roughly the size of the Imperial Hotel. Now, there is a compelling reason as to why Wetherspoons is a very good bet to develop the Imperial, if anyone is to do it. And it's not just the fact that the Premier Inn is already taken and that Travelodge has got a thing. It's the fact that if this is the Lord John on John Street, this is the inside where you can see the glazed roof of the original sorting room. In fact, it's one of the nicer features of the pub that it has a skylighting and provides a very pleasant space inside, whatever you may or may not think of the pub. But if we look at an aerial photograph of the centre of Stroud, the building, that is what was the Edwardian post office and is now the front of Wetherspoons, facing onto Russell Street, which is here. And there's the bank, the back of the NatWest Bank there on the other side of the road. That's what used to be, that's Sorrento's down to the left, and the little yard that used to be the Skittle Alley. Where's the cursor gone? Yes, I can't see it now. So if that is the Edwardian post office, this is the sorting office behind, and that's the glazed roof we saw. These are the kitchen areas beside that part of Wetherspoons. So this is all part of the sorting office. And at the back, this is the, it's unfortunate not having a cursor so small that even I can't see it. Where's it gone? This is the open terrace at the back. And this space, this is just above the original access space where the Royal Mail vans came and went. And this basically is entirely vacant downstairs. And in fact, Wetherspoons sometimes put signs up telling people that the pub is around the corner, because the nearest pub to the station is effectively the Imperial Hotel. So what is striking is that even though they're on different streets, you can see that the Imperial Hotel backs directly onto the Lord John. So basically there is a possibility, bearing in mind the Lord John is quite cramped at that point, and Wetherspoons specifically at the moment say they are looking for properties adjacent to existing properties. They're looking for hotels, they're looking for properties with the possibility of providing hotel accommodation. There's a specific sheet where they set out their requirements. And one of the reasons they might be very attracted by this, and I don't know what terms the Lord John is held on, whether it's freehold or leasehold, one of the things that might be very attractive to them is that they have the option to reorganize the Lord John to provide a much larger ground floor space and provide a hotel, which is where they seem to be most interested at the moment. They've just opened a 100-bedroom hotel in Dublin, which is their largest venture. And most of their energy seems to be in acquiring hotel sites. This gives them the opportunity to acquire a site adjacent to an existing trading property and actually to acquire a hotel, even with the possibility of building something on top here. So that's what makes Wetherspoons, I think, the most hopeful fit for this. Going back again to the archetypal image of the hotel, you can see the boarding up, looking towards the Ecotricity building there, the new Imperial House by the station. Then looking the other way, this, you may remember, this is where Princess Elizabeth inspected the Guard of Honor. I think the fire escapes refer to is to the converted private apartment that they've now provided in the Imperial, which has taken out 2 of the bedrooms. And this is the back of the sorting office. And this sort of rather interesting sort of Art Deco-ish entrance, that is the entrance where the post office lorries used to go in. And it was built to be by the station to service trains, but also, of course, none of the mail seems to go by train anymore. And you can see the point at which it joins the Imperial Hotel. And if we go onto the other side of the railway line, you can see both how big the back premises of the sorting office are. You can see on the top there, that's the top of the original Edwardian post office, though those upper floors are now converted to flats. And you can see what a large footprint the joint development would actually, the joint development would actually provide. And it is rather extraordinary that every other building in that area has been listed, except for the Imperial Hotel. So the station is quite rightly listed because it's designed by Brunel. The goods shed, which is along here, is listed, and the station master's house, which we saw at the beginning coming down the stairs from the railway, that red brick building, all of those are listed. But the Imperial Hotel, the largest and most imposing building of the entire group, and one of the conditions for listing is group value. So it's extraordinary that the listing should have recognized the station master's house, the station, and the goods shed for group value, and yet the Imperial Hotel remains unlisted. Now, I was pleased when I sent out details of this talk to receive a reply from the leader of the council saying, "Thank you for sending me the information. I can't attend, I'm afraid, as it clashes with another meeting, but I totally agree on the importance of the building and coming up with a plan, at least to get it listed in the first instance. I'll inquire with Stroud District Council's conservation officer what the situation is. Regards, Councillor Doyner Cornell." So I think that's encouraging because I'd looked into applying to get it listed myself. And there are all sorts of ways by which they try and put you off doing it by saying, check why it hasn't been listed before. But I think if it is clear, and it seems to me clear on all the papers I've looked at and that David Jones has produced, since it's clear, there seems no doubt that it's a Benjamin Bucknall building, as is Whitehall. It seems extraordinary that it isn't listed if they can actually list cart sheds, lean-tos, and other things at Nymphsville. Almost everything else he touched in, however minor way, has been listed. And yet this building remains unlisted, and therefore, to a certain extent, is at risk. So I hope we can do something about the Imperial Hotel. I hope that we can find a developer. I have, in fact, written to Wetherspoons and told them about the fact that they have a neighbouring property. I've yet to hear back from them. But whether it's Wetherspoons or somebody else, let's hope that somebody can step in and bring the hotel back into use, preferably as a hotel rather than converted to any other use, because it does seem extraordinary that a hotel so well situated right by the station should cease to be a hotel when the London Hotel has ceased to be a hotel, and that we should be left with the Premier Inn as the best that Stroud has to offer. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. I'm just going to share my screen for a moment because can you unshare yours, or can I do that? I can do that. You previously showed this
yes,
list, so we now have the other half of it. So we see here we've got Gloucester, Berni's Grill, King's Square, and the New Inn. And then we have Cheltenham, Montpellier Grill, Montpellier Walk, and the Star in Regent Street. And obviously all the other ones all over the place.
And that's good. I hadn't found that one.
I couldn't see any in Scotland, but they certainly go up to York and Bolton. So they go up into the north, Darlington, for example. Then here's your beer mats. So here's the New Inn. Then there's the Royal Ankle, Liphook, Nottingham, Tonbridge, Himley, St Anne's, Meriden, and Salisbury.
What makes them very like Wetherspoons, or is again the emphasis on a very individual chain of buildings. It may be a chain. It may be a chain set of pub restaurants, but they are set in expensively converted historic buildings.
Then just one or two clearer shots of King Street. So that's the building there.
I did see, by the way, I think it's on the Premier Inn website, when of things to do locally, George Holloway's statue was mentioned, which I thought was rather an extraordinary thing to select of all the things you could actually look at. But it was interesting. It was pleasing that he was mentioned, but I was very surprised that you choose that as a thing to recommend.
And then this is the Travelodge in Stonehouse.
That's the one at Stonehouse, yep.
Which I've converted the photos of. So I thought it just worth.
Yep, thank you for that.
For you.
I particularly like the one of the other side of the list of inns, that list of Berni inns.
Yes, I don't think it was buried